Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast, where we look at marketing principles, strategies, and tactics through the lens of space. Hi, I am your host, Izzy House. Today, we will dive into how you can transform your coworkers into passionate brand ambassadors. You can supercharge their collaboration and ignite a culture that radiates excitement for your company. My guest today is Laura Smith, Marketing Manager at Benchmark Space Systems. So lift off in 3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Space Marketing Podcast. Information relating to our discussion today and links to the video version can be found in the episode show notes on spacemarketingpodcast.com. Please like and subscribe to the podcast. It will help more people reach beyond the atmosphere. Information in this episode is for entertainment and information only. Please consult a professional for your specific situation. Our guest today is Laura Smith, Marketing Manager at Benchmark Space Systems, and this is her second time as a space marketing guest. Check out her other episode about developing a 360 strategy at a trade show. Today, we will dive into how you can transform your coworkers into passionate brand ambassadors, how you can supercharge their collaboration and ignite a culture that radiates excitement for your company and the space industry. We'll discuss training of all of our staff from the front desk to the CEO and how the importance of marketing and how to do it. So welcome to the podcast, Laura.
Thank you, Izzy. Happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays to you too. So this is your second time on the show.
Yay.
And the first episode was about delivering a 360-degree marketing strategy at a trade show. And during this interview, we touched slightly a little bit on training the engineers and the staff to help promote the company. And I love that concept. Since then, you have really dove into that direction, and I am very intrigued on what it is that you're doing, and I am excited to share this particular strategy with companies that just don't think about how to share marketing and how to share their company. I think it's a very valuable tool that most companies can do, and it's not that expensive. It just is a little bit of time. So let's quickly do the intros, and if you need more about the backstory, go to the other episode on the 360. And but we're going to touch on a little bit just to kind of get you a little bit familiar with Laura if you didn't get that episode. First, let's start off with what it is that you do.
Yes, so I'm the marketing manager for Benchmark Space Systems. So I'm part of the business development team, but a marketing team of one, essentially. And Benchmark is a full life cycle mobility partner. So we build propulsion systems, the hardware. We build the software that makes that easy to integrate and essentially autopilot your propulsion systems and the flight control avionics. But really the value add is that we are a partner with our mission partners or customers from day one. So the sooner we integrate with our mission partners and talk through the mission and the mission effect you're really trying to achieve, the more effective we can be to help with the ROI and make sure your mobility is dialed in and is doing exactly what you need it to do. Because we all know the dynamic space era is here, and the way that we've moved about in space is evolving so quickly, and things will need to change in terms of mobility and how we move around so that we have a sustainable infrastructure. So that's really what my team's passionate about, is keeping space sustainable, usable, dynamic for generations to come. And if I'm doing my job, they can all articulate that as well as I can. I like the term you use, brand ambassadors, because that's really what every individual on your team is an ambassador.
Yes, every team. And it doesn't matter what position they are. If they are somebody that cleans the building and so they go talk to their friends about how miserable it is to work there, that is a brand ambassador for the other kind. You definitely want people to be happy where they work. You want them to be excited when they come into work, and you want them to be able to articulate what it is they do and what the company does, and be able to represent the company in a way that I don't want to say is controlled, but that is the party line.
Consistent, perhaps consistent,
Consistent, yes.
aligned. Yeah, because really I saw developing these training programs as a two-way street. What you're saying about morale, essentially, and feeling like you're part of something greater. If your team doesn't understand why, it's very easy for the BD team is constantly in conversation with the market and the industry, and we're really dialed into how things are evolving and how we can support what's changing. But an engineer that's working on this one thing, they're working on this one project or this one component of that project, might not be aware. They know what our mission is and they can rally around that, but they might not be aware of some high level messaging and how things are evolving. So I see it as a benefit to them to understand that. And also, it's professional development for their career to know how to message the work that they're doing, the work that Benchmark is doing, how to be a good public speaker, how to distill technical topics in a way that people can understand. Like, these are all value adds. And the more they can build their speaking portfolio, the better it is for them and their professional development. And of course, it's great for Benchmark because we're all on the same page. We're like a unit moving in a similar direction, bringing all our unique skill sets in and our unique perspectives. It's not a group think situation, but the reason that brands we all know and love, or maybe don't love, but we know, are so effective. It's like Apple, everyone on their team, every piece of collateral is saying the same thing, like smart design, easy user interface, clean aesthetic. Like, we know those things because they're so consistent about, like, by the time your team is sick of it, the audience is just starting to grasp what it is you're about. So we want to make sure we're all aligned.
Oh gosh, there's so much really good stuff to unpack there. I want to start off with the mission. So one of the things that you said is that, we're all aware about our mission. And in some companies, they're not. I mean, it goes back to, they don't understand what the mission is of the company. And so that communication is broken right from the get start, and it just kind of slides downhill from there.
Yeah, that's part of from onboarding day one. And hopefully, when they're a potential employee is doing their research, it's so clear in your website and whatever materials they're reviewing, it's so clear who you are, then you're already starting to do your job with them understanding your why. Like, what is your why? We get very focused on the what. What is it we're doing? What technology are we using? But why? So it's clear on your website. And then the second they come in the door and they're meeting other employees and they're sitting down with the HR team, you're talking about that why, that mission statement. For us, it's to create a sustainable ecosystem for space. That involves, like, mobility is a must when it comes to space being usable for generations to come. So our team can get behind that. Like, okay, there's a reason why we're doing this.
And it's not just a bunch of words that are fluff. It should be the guiding clause, sentence, paragraph, whatever it is that you have for your statement. It should be the guiding light for your company, that if you're considering doing something, maybe it doesn't go into your mission statement, and then it's an easy decision after that. It's not part of our mission. So move on to something that is. I just like to touch back because a lot of mission statements, they're just fluff and meaningless.
Yeah. Yeah. And our team is really centered around using green propellants and alternative propellants. And we do our homework on that. We're not just saying that, like, is this really better? Is it superior to this? Is it at least comparable? And our team really has become the experts in that area because they know that's important to us that we solve for that.
And does it make space sustainable?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just, it makes things easy when your mission statement is strong.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, let's talk about the training. Do we want to talk about the why training? Why do we do training of our employees to create a message? So let's look at it from the company standpoint first.
Yeah. And there's so many levels to it and so many places that you can apply training. But at the highest level, I love the statement that marketing is the relationship you have with your audience. So in any relationship, they need to be clear on who you are and what you are about, and you need to be showing up consistently so that they trust you. Even in a personal relationship, that's the case. So a term that we use often in marketing to describe how we're presenting ourselves and how we're letting our audience know we're expert in certain subjects is thought leadership. Right? It's the term we use all the time. How do we establish our thought leadership in particular areas? So what I presented to my team, we do these monthly lunch and learns where somebody on the team that's an expert in something presents on that topic. And often it's like fluid dynamics or ballistics, or it's like something very technical. And then there's me saying, we're going to talk about public speaking and training the team on high level messaging. So I backed it up and said, this is really about thought leadership. Think of a brand that you trust so much. They put out so much content about their area of expertise. By the time they say, we recommend this, you're like, take my money, because I really trust that you are, you really know what you're doing. And we named some brands that we felt were doing that really well. So what's Benchmark's version of that? And where do we have opportunities to display our thought leadership? And I showed them all the ways we do that. We do it when we're at events. We do it when we're on stage. We do it when we're being interviewed for the media, when we're giving technical presentations, when we're posting on LinkedIn, our social media, our website. These are all opportunities to create this combined long game of thought leadership, because it's not, I put these goofy photos in the presentation of like these clickbait images, like top 10 reasons why you need a collision avoidance kit, like very clickbait. It's not that. It's a long game where I can trace back something that Benchmark is now a thought leader on. I can trace back 2 years ago when we first started talking about that thing. And I built slides with all the data points. We mentioned it here. We were on a podcast here. We wrote this article here. And by the time we launch a product around that thing, it's like, well, yeah, of course, you guys are the experts in this. Of course you are. So that's kind of the why of why we would do thought leadership. And then in terms of training on that, it really depends. And there's a lot of nuance here. So I'll wait and see if you have another specific question, because there's a lot of directions I could take the specific trainings into.
Well, let's talk about the fact that you're a team of one and how this really multiplies that effort. Mm-hmm. If it was just up to you, you'd only be able to get out so much. I mean, you know, the laws of physics are something that we have in our daily lives. We need to sleep. And by doing it this way, by making the thought leaders and helping them understand how to do this, you have literally multiplied the effort of the company to be able to spread the message even further without it being just based off of one person.
Yes. And for the marketers watching this, just to understand the breadth of my role, I cover events, PR, social media, website, creative. I feel like I'm missing major buckets for like everything in the marketing spectrum. So yes, but I am never going to be as expert in our material as my team is. They are just brilliant. But again, could be very focused on the one thing they do without relating it to the rest of what Benchmark stands for. And that's part of what this training is about.
So let's talk about the training itself.
Yeah.
So, describe what happens and what are the points that you talk about?
So when I first realized we would need to develop some more systematic materials is when we were headed to one of the earliest events that I did, Small Sat Conference in Utah. And we were bringing a big team. We were rolling deep for this one. So we were not only bringing our very well-trained business development team and some of our senior leadership, we're also bringing some more junior level engineers that might not be as dialed in as we are. So we got together I always host a briefing before we go to an event. I get everyone in a room and I do a lay of the land. I'll even show photos of the venue or the city. Like, we're here in Logan, Utah, and it's our biggest event of the year, and everyone's wearing their Hawaiian shirts because that's a thing in Small Set Conference. And you're standing at our booth and we're getting approached by all these tier ones, we call them, and there's government officials and they're asking questions about our systems and what does Benchmark do? They're just going to come to the booth and say, what do you do? And I don't want people to kind of like stumble through that. So I realized in this first training, we're really going to have to back this up and say, if you had to explain Benchmark in one sentence, here's what you could say. And I don't like to be too prescriptive, like you need to say exactly this or I'm going to slap you on the wrist. I think everyone's got a slightly different spin or twist on it, or they want it to feel authentic. And some people aren't so great about memorizing exact lines. So here's the core of what you would say. And then if they're asking more questions, here's level 2 and level 3 and how you can start to drill down. So there's that high level, who is benchmark messaging. And then there's the, why are we at this event? For any event, you need to make sure they understand the bigger picture. What is it we're trying to accomplish here? What is it we're trying to gain in insights from our customers? So what kinds of questions can we ask to get those insights? And sometimes we even distribute surveys. So we're like literally asking those questions. But if not, I want my team to understand, what should you be trying to learn from this event? What are the key themes? Like, what PR do we have going out around this event? Do we have new partnerships? Do we have like major highlights or milestones? Are we going to be launching a video that shows what our headquarters looks like on the inside? I want them to be so aware of the marketing messaging for that event and who's going to be on stage speaking. Are we doing like a side meeting or a hosted event where we want you promoting that? Are we running our mobility shuttle? So here's the route map. We want to make sure everybody knows how this works. So it's like high level down to the nittiest of grittiest details. And of course, like travel logistics and all that. So it started with these pre-event briefings, and it gave people a chance to ask questions. And based on their questions, I would refine the slides for next time. Okay, this is where people seem to get confused. And then we do a recap after the event where we get feedback on like, how did the booth layout work for everyone? Was the messaging clear? Did you keep getting questions about things that we thought were clear? Did people know what this image meant? So we make sure that the messaging is coming across the way that we want it to. And what were you, I love to ask the question of my team, what were you not prepared for? What did you get asked that you were like, I didn't know how to answer that? Because we need to make sure that's something that we address clearly in the next time. So that's an event example.
I want to touch on that real quick, is that when you're, especially with you're dealing with newbies, when you're at an event, you are saying the same things over and over and over again. And if you get it wrong, it gets stuck.
Yes.
So we want to make sure that the right stuff gets stuck, not the wrong stuff.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And I tend to, creep and listen in when my engineers are talking, and I ask them to do the same for me and like critique after, like, how would you have answered that question? And I am not. And I encourage my team, don't be afraid to pull in other people. Like, oh, that's such a great question. Let me ask my CTO, who's right over here, who's more trained in that subject. But I love the critique of like, oh, I wouldn't use that word here. Like today we were debating the difference between the word configurable and customizable. Like, which one do we use in which context? Those mean very different things. So that's how dialed in we get in on our usage.
Hold on to your boosters. We will be right back with guest Laura Smith, Marketing Manager at Benchmark Space Systems, after the briefest message from our sponsors. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast so you don't miss a thing. Talk about the new training that you're developing and how this was born. And you did the pre-briefing and the post-briefing, but now you're discovering that there's more that you can do.
Yeah, so the next evolution was we had a group of engineers going to the 3AF Space Propulsion Conference in Glasgow, and I really wanted to get them trained. They were giving technical presentations on areas that they are absolutely experts in, but I wanted to make sure they were comfortable talking about benchmark and potentially getting interviewed on the spot. So we did a training and I had slides prepared to say, okay, why are we going to this conference? What's the theme of the conference? How do we fit into that? These are the papers that your teammates are presenting on, so you're all aware. And then I talked about giving a presentation. What are some like public speaking do's and don'ts and tips and tricks, like talking with your hands, like even if you feel like you're overdoing it, you're being a little bit more dramatic than you might be in person. It translates when you're in front of a group, especially when they've been listening to talks all day. A little bit of animation goes a long way. Now, be yourself. You don't need to like step into a character, although I do recommend that too. Some people like Beyonce has an alter ego that she adopts when she's nervous about public speaking that helps her like step into this version of herself that's like fierce. And I could go so deep if the team is into it. I can really get into the psychology of it. And I touch on that a bit. But I talk about like, you're the expert in this, but it's also, and somebody said this to me, Izzy, it's not about you, it's about your audience. And I made sure I used that. I used that in my training, that you're the expert, so be confident, but this is about how your audience is going to receive the information and how you can make a story out of the presentation that's not just like these bullet points. So we talk about flow of a presentation, having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And then there might be a Q&A, and there might be reporters in the audience, and there might be some questions that are a little more uncomfortable. So we talk about some very specific techniques for either bridging questions, like somebody asked you a very left field question. What's the language you could say to something like, I think that's a really interesting problem, and there's people working on that are much more expert than me. What I think is really interesting, though, is this, and how you can kind of gracefully segue into that's not really what I'm here to talk about, but this is, or to reframe a leading question like, so what you're saying is, when really that's not what you said. So you would say, actually, I wouldn't characterize it that way. I would say this. So giving them some language to help gracefully reframe. Their favorite part, though, was we have a mock Q&A. So here are some on-the-fly questions you might get about Benchmark. When were you founded? How many employees do you have? What's your position on electric propulsion? Like, basic things that we really want them to know. And they loved that. I thought they'd be like, oh no, you're putting me on the spot, but they were like, give us more. They wanted to be quizzed. So I think those Q&As are really helpful. That particular training, really that team went in just gung-ho to that event. They felt so like dialed in. And then of course a debrief after, what did you get asked that you weren't prepared for? So that really inspired me to create this knowledge library and this training process for the whole team. At one of these lunch and learns I was talking about, I gave a presentation that was similar to what I did for the 3AF group and said, here's kind of some tips and tricks on public speaking, some benchmark overview, but I also created this intake form We all love forms, right? More forms. But what this helps me to do is support my team the best I can in whatever it is they're going out to speak about. So they fill out the form and it says, what is it that you're doing? Were you approached to do this, or is this an opportunity that you sought? Are you going to be showing slides? Do you need a headshot and a bio? Who's the audience for this? Will this be recorded? Will it be available after the fact? Can you get photos of you on stage that we can add to your profile? Is it something I want to post about on LinkedIn? So it helps me gather all that information to assess what do they need to be prepared for this. And it could be anything from some of our engineers going to a university to do a mentorship opportunity or sit behind a recruiting table and talk about Benchmark and why it's so exciting to work here. And they might want to do a dry run with me. So some won't rise up to the level of like hours of training. Some will just be like, let's sit down for 30 minutes to an hour and just kind of talk through the event. And some will be more involved, like I'm going to speak at JANF, or I'm going to be on a panel and we're going to spend more time together. We're really going to dial in those slides. We're going to understand who is on this panel, what's their background, how are we bringing a unique perspective to this panel. And I also do this when we're hosting panels and we're bringing in other people. We sit with all the panelists and understand, like, why are you here? What's the perspective that we brought you in to share? And what are the questions we'll be asking? And how can we really make this like very interesting and engaging for the audience? Yeah, there's so many levels.
And how can you have a relationship with each other too? Yeah. Because relationships are so key. If you go onto a panel and you're combative, well, guess what? You're representing the company, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, it doesn't look good for the brand and you won't be invited back. So that's a really good reason to make sure that your employees are getting public speaking training, is because, there's some faux pas that you can do while you're up on stage. And one will be going over time.
Yeah.
Encroaching into somebody else's time, being boring. All that reflects on the company. Very few people have a natural ability to public speak. It's very daunting for most of us, and it's okay. It's something we can learn. It's something we can get used to. I was myself so painfully shy. I would not talk to some people when I was 19 years old. And I learned how to public speak and gain confidence in that. That doesn't mean that every time I hit the stage, I'm like, woohoo! Yeah. It's still, there's the butterflies, which are a good thing. It makes it to where you prepare. Yeah. And, but it's a powerful, powerful thing that you can give your employees to represent your company, but also that you can give your employees for them. Because people that can public speak and know how to put across their view, they are better employees, they are better people, and they have better careers because they're able to make that step and talk to those employers and whatnot to make sure their career progresses. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I hear the phrase technology sells itself. Good technology sells itself. And
no, it does not.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And it is, like you said, one of the best skills you can have is being able to articulate your vision and what you built or your process. That is so valuable. And I love, like, different tips work for different people. So I'll offer some up. Just, you never know what's going to land. But an example of one that I've offered to my team is, like you said, those nerves are not necessarily a bad thing. And I'll tell myself before I get up on stage that the adrenaline you feel is what can carry you. And it's very similar to like excitement. Like nerves are very similar to like, I'm excited about this. I'm passionate about this. It's like energizing. So instead of trying to calm your nerves, like I used to try to take deep breaths and try to slow it down. Like for some people that works. I'm going to slow down my nervous system and try to regulate myself. But I find I like ride that wave of energy and momentum, and that like translates better. And then my passion comes across because nobody got into this field because they're like, like there's a lot of passion in the space industry, and that
Yes.
will like help connect you to your audience when they feel that passion. You could be talking about something like valves, some very specific thing that often can be like a pain point for a lot of people, and you can make that fascinating. We have an engineer on my team who he'll do a lot of these lunch and learns, and he can make anything hysterical and interesting, and he'll use memes and jokes, and like that is a gift. And you don't need to be like him, but the more you can translate your ideas, the stronger it will be for sure.
Simon Sinek, he's a leadership person that talks about public speaking. I was listening to him, and he said something very interesting that I've brought with me my whole life, and that is the physical response to nerves is exactly the same as excitement. The only difference is what we're telling ourselves it is.
Yeah.
So, are we telling ourselves, "Oh, I'm going to mess up. I'm going to be terrible." Or are we telling ourselves, "This is fun.
Yeah.
This is great. This is going to really help somebody in the audience today."
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all what we're saying in our brains
Yeah.
that
And on that,
translates that.
yes. And on that note, how we feel when we make a mistake, or say you stumble over a word, I'll see people apologize. Like, I'm sorry. I'm like, you don't have to apologize that you stumbled over a word. Like, that's okay. Just not creating layering on top of it that I'm not doing a good job or this needs to be flawless.
In fact, a flawlessness sounds like a commercial,
Yes.
and it will erode your trust. If you're up on stage and you do make a mistake and you flow with it, everybody's like, "Oh, they're just like me,"
Yes.
and that makes you human.
Yeah.
And so own them.
Yes. You feel your audience sigh with relief when you can move on from what might have been a fumble. Your audience can like relax, like, okay, she's okay. She's not going to die up there. I'm not going to die. We're all okay. I also tell my team that if you're really prepared, that helps with nerves. So that doesn't mean necessarily script out word for word. Some people really like to do that. They just want to memorize it. I never force anyone to do that because for me, I like to have general notes. But the more you feel prepared and you've kind of run through it in your head, that's going to help with the nerves, and it will help with the filler words. So I tell my team, be okay with pauses. Be okay with taking a moment, especially when you're responding to a question, because we often use the ums and the likes to fill the silence, but we don't need to do that. You can also try like pinching yourself every time you say an to try to just bring awareness to doing it, so we can get really granular like that. And I make sure I have all these resources, all these presentations we develop with all these tips and tricks, all the benchmark messaging, all the imagery, a glossary of terms, even a glossary of acronyms, because oh my gosh, there are so many acronyms. It's all in this knowledge library that we built over time. So anyone going to give a presentation can access templates, can access the glossary. I've been building speaker PDFs. So if we have team members that I'm pitching for a speaking opportunity, we have their bio and their recent speaking events, what they're experts in, what they could talk about if that was relevant. So now I've created these little like one pagers for all my speakers. We have a template for that now. So it's like building this library we can resource from.
And as events, that is so helpful, by the way, not just for your speakers, but it's helpful for the events that are bringing on those speakers.
Mm-hmm.
And everything that you can do to make a positive relationship and encounter just helps the company. They'll sit there and say, "Oh, We need a speaker. Benchmark was pretty good last time. Let's see what they have.
And I can imagine all the hundreds of inbound and applications that event organizers get for speaking opportunities. I can only imagine. So I try to think of it from their perspective. Like if I just have this one pager, here's a picture of this person, here's a picture of them on stage. So they've been on stage before. Here's some podcast episodes you can check out to get a sense of their cadence and how they talk. I imagine that's really helpful on their end. And also, if we're offering a panel, we'll say, we have people, we have contacts already. We can reach out to these people on your behalf and bring them in because we know they're thought leaders on these particular topics. So trying to take some of the legwork out of it for them.
And let's touch a little bit on one of the things that we collaborated on that created an episode that I feel was very useful for me as well as for every marketer out there. And that was preparing for a speaker proposal. And, what's going on behind the curtain when people are selecting speakers for their shows. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really insightful, and it made a difference for me. And I work for events. So and I didn't even know all this.
I certainly tailored some of my approach based on that episode. Like, that's a good tip. I'm going to incorporate that. And we were accepted to be on a panel at the next event I applied to. So thank you for that.
I will have that link in the show notes so that you can go and see how to present your proposal for speaking. All right. We talked about how it's good for the company, and we talked about how it's good for the employee. What do we have left to talk about?
It's good for me as a marketer. Like you said, I'm a team of one, and the more empowered my team is to go out there and speak on our behalf, that just makes my job a lot easier. I know that they're dialed in. I know that they get it. And I, of course, always listen to their podcast episodes or their interviews after, or I sit in on the embargo with the journalists so I can give them feedback or I can ask questions. It's definitely two-way. I'm like, why did you say it like this? What did you mean by that? Or coach them on, this answer wasn't as succinct as it could have been. It was a little rambly. So let's see how we can dial it in. So all of that, they just get better and better every time. And the techniques that I shared with the team about it's typically in the context of being interviewed by a journalist that might have a particular angle that they're focused on, but it might not be the same message that you are intending to get across. So those kind of bridging and flagging and rephrasing techniques, when I hear my team doing that and getting better at that, it's like, everybody's winning here. It's just, and some people are just experts. And I told the team, once you learn these, you will start noticing them when you're watching TV and it's like CSI and you're hearing like they're interviewing, or you're going to notice these techniques and they'll just become second nature to you.
Absolutely. And one of the things I'd like to say is that once you know about the ums and the filler words, you hear it even on presidential speeches. You'll start to really focus in on those ums and you're like, wow, they say that a lot.
Yes, you can't, there's a lot of things you can't unhear once you hear them. The other thing I think is really important to remind my team, or really any technical background, is to back it up and start with context. So it's really easy to get right into the weeds about, let's give an example. If you're talking to more of a mainstream audience, which is not typically our target market, but I think this is a good example. And you start talking about propulsion, and there's electric and there's chemical, and it's called a Hall effect, and it's called a high thrust with this much ISP. And they're like, they didn't even know that satellites had engines. And I say that in quotes because that's not what we call them, but they didn't even know satellites needed a way to maneuver. So, and now we're talking about ISP and they're just lost. So that's a more extreme example, but still, like, don't assume, even if the reporter is pretty knowledgeable, don't assume they know already what you're talking about. So start with context. Hi, we're Benchmark. We build propulsion systems. We offer CP and EP and explain the difference and why that matters before you start getting into the weeds. So I think just sometimes our brains, when you're so used to being technically detail focused, our brains are just wired for that. So it's a good reminder.
Let's go back to you being a one person show. How do you prioritize what gets done? Because these are big rocks, but they're not something that normally is on the to-do list for most companies. And I want to say most companies, the ones that know marketing and have been doing marketing for decades versus the new companies that are having to do it in space. The majority of companies don't really think of doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And so you are adding that to your list,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a pretty big chunk when you're creating libraries and things like that. So how do you prioritize what gets done for the future and what gets done for the moment?
Yes, it starts out of necessity. You have an event coming, you know you're bringing people that need more training. Even the most seasoned business development team member is going to need training on the messaging for that particular event. So often it can be time based. Like, we need to step back and train so that we're not on the floor. Like, the time you might spend backtracking or unraveling something that was said that was not accurate is going to far exceed the time if you had just taken to train on it. So it can often be time based. And that's one of the reasons I said, I'm going to give this company-wide presentation. It's going to give me a deadline to really put some time into that knowledge library and make sure that's in a good place and create this form. And now when I get the intake on the form, it's like, okay, now I'm going to dial in this type of training. And then I start to build templates over time that get reusable. So often time-based, but then just setting aside time intentionally, because I know it's going to save me time later and it's going to save my team time later. So I've chosen to prioritize it, and my team supports it because they're also aware and on board with how important it is.
I love the lunch and learn. I want to go on to that real quick. Most companies do not have a lunch and learn. And one of the most challenging projects I ever did was I went in and I was doing a trifold brochure. It's a very simple piece, but it was encompassing the whole company, and most of the departments didn't know what the other departments were doing. And so they didn't even know some of them even existed. So it was a matter of going in and diving into those different categories to build it. So I love the fact that you have different entities training other entities in the company of what they even do.
Yeah.
Because if you're over here in HR, you may not know the difference between power and propulsion.
Yeah.
And that there is a very distinct difference. And so I love the lunch and learn. Plus, it brings them together and makes everybody support each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it gives you content.
Yes. We love content. We're always scanning for content. We love the Slack
easy
channel.
Content.
Yeah. All the imagery on the Slack channels. I'm always scanning for what's interesting. What can we share? Because a lot of it we can't. But the lunch and learns are great for so many reasons. One, because I can see the person giving the presentation really taking pride in their expertise. Something that comes naturally to you might feel like sorcery to someone else. Like, what? You do what? So it's like it's empowering that individual. But I've also seen really tangible examples of how it's going to make us more efficient as a company, because the avionics person will be talking about, when you design a system to this particular spec, even though it doesn't make that much of a difference to you, design engineer, it's going to create this much extra hours and workaround on my end. and you can see the light bulbs go off like, oh, I had no idea, I just did it that way because that was the default. So it's like, oh, okay, we can streamline this process by understanding the ramifications down the supply chain. So I've seen examples of that. I also, my favorite part is what happens on the chat. When the lunch and learns are happening and there's a chat bar, the questions people are asking, the jokes they're making, which are often over my head, like the team is so engaged and excited throughout that whole hour that it's just delightful. Even if I'm not really completely grasping what the person's talking about because it's some principles of physics, I'm just so entertained by the chat and everybody's enthusiasm. So they are an hour well spent once a month for sure.
And another thing that may come out of it is that, where you were talking about how they may not realize that being designed a certain way was causing extra work. They may realize the opposite in that, oh, that's a thing. Let's solve for this problem and let's create something new and innovative that is just better.
Yes.
And so it can fuel that as well.
Yes, it just breaks us out of our silos. In the world of startups, process and documentation is everything in an industry that's changing so fast. And we no longer consider ourselves a startup. We've been around since 2017. The documentation that our team has, like talk about training, anybody should be able to walk in and understand what we do because we built such amazing process that's repeatable. We know how to get to qualification. So training across the board, systems process training is really what brings you from kind of chaotic, scrappy startup to like a real business that can repeat what it does.
And process, I would like to also touch on that too, is that's a product. A lot of companies, they start off with one gizmo, and that's the gizmo they build. But there may be versions of that gizmo that can go into other industries that can maybe level up the financial part of it. And there can be the process of that gizmo that you can sell. So, process is extremely important if you've developed something that works that another company can also use.
Yeah.
So just a note on that.
Yes, absolutely. And for us, the process of bringing a propulsion solution to life, that is unique to us. That's proprietary. We've developed this, mission design phase to design to iteration to test. And then we're going to go on the launch site and fuel and integrate. That's all part of our process. We're going to support on orbit operations to decommission and reentry. And then we can circle through that process again with you and make it even shorter and faster next time. So that it's more than just the hardware for sure.
And it eliminates mistakes. Yeah. So if you're a company that's got a well-oiled process and a client starts to work with you, then they can trust that process will carry the project through with minimal disruption.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's a good for your brand as well.
Yes, I don't know if all marketers feel this way, but I certainly feel that having project management in your bones is such an advantageous skill, especially when you're a small team and you're doing a lot. Maybe if you're only creative, or even then, I just feel like you have to be so organized to keep things moving along. Like you have so many channels and platforms and you're timing posts and you're tagging people and dealing with the correspondence that comes in. Like if you're not organized, I don't know how you
chaos.
do it. It's total chaos. Yeah. And it's just like the scope of your work can be so broad and never ending because, we had hundreds and hundreds of media mentions last year. And I'm tracking all of those. And do we need to respond to these? Is that how we want to be perceived? Like, you just have to be so on top of it. And then I really rely on my team to do a lot of the inbound. Like, okay, we read this article. This is why this is relevant to us. Maybe there's some thought leadership we want to do around this. This seems to be an area that the industry is struggling. We have solutions. Let's do some thought leadership. So I rely on them for that back and forth for sure.
Well, in the project management, that is also a brand thing, because if, for me, if I know an event's happening in a year, then why are we waiting to the last minute to get some of the stuff done? And as people without project management skills, they wait to the last minute when everything is on fire, and then your brand suffers because you look like you don't know what you're doing. And then you haven't prioritized the right things, which is one of the key parts of this whole conversation, is that you're prioritizing something that is way before the fire is ignited. You are looking into the future and you're saying, let's just avoid that fire altogether and let's do something powerful instead.
Yeah.
And that takes project management thinking. You cannot just be the seat of your pants and have that kind of power be generated by your efforts.
You really limit your options when you're last minute too. It's like, that's a cool idea, but we don't have enough time, or it would cost more to expedite, or you really just, you're more limited. Now, not to say things don't occur to you last minute, or there's things we don't pull off by the seat of our pants because it's just something that came up. But yeah, like you said, if you know it's coming, start working backwards. And the more I do these events where we go to a lot of the same locations and the venue is the same, I get better and better at it every year. My process documents are just dialed in. I know what the team's going to need to know when. We create Slack channels where we start communicating really early on. And that just reminded me of one other aspect of training that I didn't mention, and this often applies to events, is we are at times working with partners. That's a big part of our model, is that whatever we can't offer in this like spectrum of mobility solutions, we can bring in partners that do it better than we can. So there's a training aspect there of understanding the partner's technology. Like, we might do a video call and have some questions for them, like, help us understand why you do it the way that you do. I want my team to be able to speak to it almost as good as you can. And I say almost because when it gets really technical or really in the weeds, we're going to say, let's get on a call with this partner and let's do this together. We're not going to pretend we know it better than them, especially in the early days. But making sure the partner is comfortable with how we're talking about them. We're now representing them at an event, and we want to be sharing the messaging in the correct way. So we create special documentation around partnerships. Like, let's create a manual and some FAQs and bring back those questions to the partner after the fact. So it's not always strictly internal.
And I would like to say there's a lot of documentation involved, and there is some artificial intelligence that can help with that documentation nowadays, which really is a time saver if you're in marketing, in doing some of this documentation.
Yes, I just found a program that will screen record. Let's say you want to teach someone, how do you create a web article on your website? You can go through the process and it will screen record everything that you did and then use AI to create written instructions. It's like, oh my gosh, that would have taken me so long to screenshot all of that and document it.
But we definitely could talk for hours and do a whole library ourselves of all the different marketing things. You are definitely one of the most knowledgeable people I know in marketing, and I am honored to be connected with you.
Thank you, Izzy. Likewise, you're really doing a service to the entire space marketing community, not only by bringing us all together as space marketers with this kind of niche type of marketing that is very, it's nuanced. I've worked in a lot of different industries, and space is really very nuanced. but you're also working with the broader audience to help them understand why space is important, and we all benefit from that. So thank you.
A special thanks to Laura Smith, Marketing Manager at Benchmark Space Systems, for sharing her journey to space, and be sure to check out her links listed in today's show notes. Please like and subscribe to the Space Marketing Podcast to help us get the word out about this incredible industry of space. I hope that you have found this podcast useful for your journey as you reach for the stars.